I love scripture where Jesus is allowed to be human. Far too often, especially people in my job, try to treat Jesus as this kind of all-knowing, above all, always perfect. There's even some churches that go so far as requiring Jesus did not sin in their creed. I had an encounter about that one time. This is just a sidebar, and someone said, you tell me that Jesus didn't sin," and I said, "Well, you tell me what sin is first, and then I'll respond." He just walked away. He wasn't able to. This passage we're looking at today is from John, and John again is a different beast from the other scriptures. John doesn't tell the story of the chronology. John is right up front, Jesus the Messiah, no questions asked, we know what is going in. And then we proceed through John to have experiences like this one, where the whole idea of Jesus as Messiah is reinforced. But again, this is Jesus as Messiah as they understood it, number of generations after Jesus had died. At the time the story is supposed to be taking place, around, I don't know, 30, the idea of Messiah that the Hebrew folks was not worked out, but they still believed in the warrior, in the king, in the one who was going to come and get rid of the Romans, who was going to restore them to glory, who was going to make a Hebrew country, bring everybody back that was part of the diaspora, that they were just going to be part of the community, and they would not have to worry about any foreigners at all. They would just be them. And of course, that's not Jesus, what Jesus was about at all. So we have this story set in the time of the early first century, written at the end of the first century. So we've got a little bit of distance going on there. But we have the story of people following Jesus. Now, as the story goes, Jesus had been in Jerusalem since the fall. He was there for the festival of Shavuot, which is one of the harvest festivals that the Hebrew people were expected to attend. It was a pilgrimage festival. And he stayed through, and this was now early December as far as we're concerned. And it was the Feast of Dedication, which is Hanukkah. If you're not familiar with the Hanukkah story, it was getting rid of the Greeks who had defaced the temple, who had put a statue of Zeus in the temple. And in the process of getting rid of them, getting rid of the statue, getting rid of the Greeks, kicking them out of the country, they wanted to rededicate the temple, but they couldn't because they didn't have any holy oil. They had only enough oil for one day. So the miracle is that oil lasted the full 8 days, so they could make more ceremonial oil to keep the menorah, the candelabra, in the temple going. So Jesus was there celebrating that. By the time Jesus was doing this, according to the story, it had been over 200 years since the story had happened originally. It did not look like the Hanukkah festival that we have today. And we have to be really clear about that, because the early Hebrews might have been the ancestors of the Jewish tradition, but Jewish tradition is that came later, that we experience today as our neighbors and our friends. That is different from what was celebrated back then. We don't know much about the Feast of Dedication. It was obviously a celebration. It was an Independence Day of such for the Hebrew people. So Jesus had been there from a feast day to a celebration of independence, through all sorts of other stuff that was going on. And he'd been teaching in the temple. And he was walking on the portico. So the porticos were the porches outside the temple. And they were following him and listening to him, and they were getting so frustrated. "Just tell us, are you the Messiah?" And you can hear Jesus' frustration in return. And he's like, I've told you everything you need to know. Can you not see what I'm doing? But they didn't. And this is part of the story that we come to again and again and again in the Gospels, is that people do not recognize, they don't see what Jesus is doing. They don't understand the messaging going on. Because for them, the Messiah was this king, this warlord, this combination that was going to get rid of the Romans. But Messiah, as Jesus lived it, as Christians came to recognize it generations and centuries later, was a very, very different beast. It was not about political leadership. It was not about being in control of a geographic area. It was something so much more profound. And Jesus had to explain it to them again, that my sheep know my voice. Sheep is a common metaphor used in John because it was so common around. It was kind of like the bread and the cup for the Last Supper. Jesus wasn't taking anything unusual or special. He was taking the most common things that every meal would have and saying, when you do this, do it in remembrance of me. Very, very simple stuff. So much like the shepherd and sheep metaphor, sheep would be roaming. There would be people bringing sheep into the temple for sale. There'd be other markets that were going on. There'd be in the hillside. People were heavily involved in sheep manufacturing, wool, everything else that went along with it. So it was a common thing for people could see what a shepherd did. A shepherd walked in front of his sheep, whistled to them, didn't kind of check over, didn't have them kind of on a leash walking them through. Jesus, the shepherd in Jesus' time, were expecting their sheep to be right behind them. And imagine, there's all these shepherds leading their sheep into and around the city. But the sheep of each shepherd knows the voice. That's the theory anyway. I wasn't there 2,000 years ago, so I don't know. But from what I understand of herding history, each shepherd had their own call, and the sheep recognized it. So again, easy, simple metaphor that people can get into. Thing is that we've taken that metaphor and we've twisted it over the years. Jesus is not saying, believe in me, and then you will be part of my sheep, part of my flock, part of my followers. Jesus is saying, my sheep, my people, know my voice. They know my messaging. They know where I am and what I expect. So he's talking to these people in the portico and saying, what more do you need? I have told you what I need to tell you. I have told you repeatedly. I have given you every example that I possibly can. I have done things that you've seen and noted. Why are you not getting this message? My people get it. Why is this so hard for you? You know, that question could be asked today. Why is it so hard for us to hear the message of Jesus? We have wrapped it up in religiosity. We have created this religion that Jesus never created. We have made this world of rules around the faith. We have made the assumption that just because we profess to be Christians, that we're actually Jesus followers. And that's not necessarily a one-to-one comparison. There are a lot of people who hear the call of Jesus, who understand the message, who want nothing to do with the institutional church. And there are others who have dedicated their lives to being in the institution, and they really don't hear the message. They show up, they do what they need to do, they move their bodies in the right way, they say the right responses, but it's really not in their heart. And that's what Jesus was trying to tell them 2,000 years ago. It's the message we have to take away today. How do we know that Jesus is calling us? Because we feel it. We live it. We see how we can do things. Jesus was about one thing. It was about making people understand how to live in harmony, the way God wanted us to be. That message never changed. It may have taken different examples, but it never changed. So for us to hear Jesus speaking to us, that is the message that we have to take away, to have to hear. Jesus says in this scripture that God gave Jesus the people that were following God's message, Jesus' message. It's the same thing. And Jesus even says, I am one with God. There's no separation here. There's no distinction. There's no picking sides. There's no following one means we're not necessarily with the other. It's all together. And it's all the message of love and acceptance and appreciation and mutual service. We do not need to hang Jesus on the term Messiah. We don't need to have a war leader or a political leader or anything like that to make the message real and tenable. All we have to do is listen with our hearts. The thing with all that other noise is it intentionally blocks us from hearing about it. Those who are caught up in the religiosity of our tradition miss the faith. And Jesus tells us repeatedly, forget about all the other pomp and circumstance. That's not important. What is important is you hear my voice. You know what I expect. You are part of the world I have asked you to help me co-create. We hear Jesus' voice. We know it. We know who our leader is. our shepherd. We know who we're following. We can be assured that the message is consistent and the message will not change going forward. We know the shepherd, and the shepherd knows us.